Tired of the noise, tired of the constant thinking, rethinking, replaying, rewinding, predicting, doubting. Tired of lying in bed at night while your mind runs marathons you never signed up for. And here's the truth most people don't say out loud. Your biggest problem is not your life. It's the voice narrating it. Because while you've been trying to fix your situation, your mind has been quietly sabotaging every step forward. Overthinking isn't harmless. It's not just being careful. It's not intelligence. It's hesitation dressed up as wisdom. And it's stealing your time, your confidence, your clarity, and your future. But here's the shift. What if your mind isn't broken? What if it's just untrained? Because a wandering mind creates a wandering life. And until you take control of it, nothing outside of you will ever feel stable. And that's exactly what this audiobook is about. In this audiobook, Stop Overthinking, How to Silence Your Mind and Take Control, you're going to learn how to quiet the chaos, interrupt the loops, and reclaim authority over your inner world. We're going to walk through this step by step. You'll discover why your mind won't stop racing, how overthinking rewires your behavior without you realizing it, why anxiety is not your enemy but a signal, and most importantly, how to build a calm, disciplined, and focused mind that works for you instead of against you. This is not therapy. This is not surface-level motivation. And this is not about pretending everything is okay. This is about learning to sit in the storm and realizing you are the one controlling the weather. Here's a line you need to hear early. If you can't control your thoughts will control your life. No exceptions. Now, before we go further, understand this clearly. This audiobook is for education, reflection, and personal growth. It is not medical advice, but what you're about to hear can fundamentally change how you experience your own mind if you actually apply it. Because listening is easy. Change is not. So as you move through this journey, don't just hear the words. Watch yourself. Notice your thoughts. Catch your patterns. Because the transformation doesn't happen in this audio. It happens in the moments after it. Now let me ask you something. How many times have you suffered from something that never actually happened? How many conversations have you replayed in your head? How many outcomes have you predicted, feared, imagined, and emotionally reacted to, only to realize later none of it was real? That's not awareness. That's mental noise. And the more you live inside that noise, the less you live in reality. Because overthinking doesn't just slow you down. It distorts your perception. It takes small uncertainties and turns them into threats. It takes silence and turns it into rejection. It takes delay and turns it into failure. And slowly, quietly, it begins to shape your identity. You start believing you're indecisive. You start believing you're anxious. You start believing you're just like this. But listen carefully. You are not your thoughts. You are the one observing them. And that single distinction changes everything. Because the moment you realize that thoughts are not commands, they're suggestions, you begin to create space. And in that space, you regain power. Most people never learn this. They react to every thought as if it's truth. They obey every emotion as if it's instruction. They chase every impulse as if it's necessary. And that's why they feel out of control. Not because life is chaotic, but because their mind is. Now think about the modern world you're living in. Constant notifications, endless scrolling, information overload, comparison, pressure, noise. Your brain was not designed for this level of stimulation. And yet, every single day you feed it more opinions, more scenarios, more uncertainty. No wonder your mind won't slow down. It's overstimulated, overfed, and undertrained. You don't need more input. You need control. Because right now, your mind is like a room filled with voices, old memories, future fears, external opinions, internal doubts, all speaking at once. And you've been trying to listen to all of them. That's the mistake. Because clarity doesn't come from listening to everything. It comes from choosing what to ignore. Let that sit for a moment, because this audiobook is not about adding more thoughts to your mind. It's about removing the ones that don't belong. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Overthinking feels productive. It feels like you're doing something. It feels like preparation. It feels like control. But in reality, it's avoidance, avoiding action, avoiding risk, avoiding discomfort, avoiding the unknown. You tell yourself you're thinking things through, but what you're really doing is delaying the moment you have to act. And every time you delay, you reinforce the habit, until eventually, thinking becomes your default, and action becomes your fear. This is how people get stuck. Not because they don't know what to do, but because they can't stop thinking about doing it. And here's the cost no one talks about. Every time you overthink, you drain your mental energy. Decision fatigue sets in. Your clarity fades, your confidence drops, and suddenly, even small decisions feel heavy. That's why you hesitate. That's why you doubt. That's why you feel overwhelmed. Not because life is too much, but because your mind is overloaded. So here's the shift we're going to begin making today. You are not going to try to eliminate thinking. That's impossible. You are going to learn how to direct it, because a controlled mind is not silent. It's intentional. And intentional thinking creates intentional living. So in this first chapter, we begin with awareness, not control, not discipline, awareness, because you cannot change what you do not see. And right now, your thoughts are running in the background, unnoticed, unchallenged, unquestioned. That ends here. From this moment forward, you start noticing. When your mind drifts, you notice. When it spirals, you notice. When it replays, you notice. No judgment, no reaction, just awareness. Because awareness is the first form of control. And control is what gives you freedom. Here's your first simple practice. Nothing complicated, nothing overwhelming, just this. The next time a thought appears that creates tension, pause and say to yourself, that's a thought. Not, that's true. Not, that's real. Just, that's a thought. This creates distance, and distance creates clarity. And clarity is where control begins. Most people never create that space. They jump straight from thought to emotion, from emotion to reaction, from reaction to regret. You're going to interrupt that cycle. And once you do, everything starts to change. Because when you stop reacting automatically, you start responding intentionally. And that is the beginning of self-mastery. Now we're just getting started, because awareness alone is not enough. In the next chapter, we're going to break down exactly how your mind tricks you, how it creates false urgency, false fear, false narratives, and how you've been unknowingly believing all of it. And once you see that clearly, you won't be able to unsee it. And that's where real control begins. So stay with me, because what you're about to uncover next might be the reason you've been stuck all along. Dear friends, We've just started working on this channel, so we'd really appreciate your support. Please like the video and leave a few words in the comments. It'll really help us promote it. We'd be very grateful. Let's keep going. Chapter 2. The Illusion Machine. Your mind is not just thinking. It's constructing, constantly, relentlessly, silently building stories, meanings, interpretations, without ever asking for your permission. And the most dangerous part? You believe them. You don't question them. You don't pause. You accept them as reality. That's where the trap begins. Because your mind doesn't just observe the world, it creates a version of it. And if that version is distorted, your entire life starts to feel distorted. Let's go deeper. Right now, your brain is running what psychologists call a prediction machine. It's constantly trying to answer one question: what happens next? Sounds helpful, sounds logical. But here's the problem. Your brain is biased toward survival, not truth. It doesn't care about accuracy. It cares about protection. So when it doesn't know something, it fills in the gaps with fear, with doubt, with worst-case scenarios, and suddenly, uncertainty becomes danger, silence becomes rejection, delay becomes failure, and none of it is real. But it feels real. That's the illusion. You see, your mind would rather be wrong than unprepared, so it overestimates threats, it exaggerates outcomes, it assumes the worst. Because thousands of years ago, that kept humans alive. But today, it keeps you stuck. Think about how many times your mind has told you, they probably think I'm not good enough. This is going to go wrong. I shouldn't say anything. What if I fail? And instead of questioning those thoughts, you adjusted your behavior around them. You stayed quiet. You hesitated. You held back. Not because reality demanded it, but because your mind suggested it. That's how invisible control works, not through force, but through belief. And once you believe the thought, it shapes your actions, which shapes your results, which reinforces the belief. That's the loop. And most people are trapped in it for years. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever avoided doing something not because it was impossible, but because you imagined it going wrong? Of course you have. We all have. And in that moment, the imagination becomes stronger than reality. That's overthinking at its core. Not thinking too much, but believing too much of what you think. Because here's a truth that will change how you see your mind forever. Not every thought deserves your attention. Let that land. Because right now, you treat every thought like it's important, like it needs to be analyzed, solved, understood. But most thoughts, they're noise, random, conditioned, recycled from past experiences, echoes of other people's opinions, fragments of fear. They don't deserve your time. They don't deserve your energy. And they definitely don't deserve control over your life. But because you never learned to filter them, they all get through. And the louder they are, the more power they seem to have. This is why your mind feels overwhelming. Not because it's powerful, but because it's unfiltered. Imagine your phone buzzing every few seconds. Notifications, messages, alerts, spam. Now imagine you opened every single one, responded to all of them, took each one seriously. How long before you feel drained? How long before you feel scattered? That's exactly what you're doing in your mind. Every thought is a notification, and you've been treating all of them like priority. That ends here. Because the next level of control is not about stopping thoughts. It's about choosing which ones matter and ignoring the rest. This is where discipline begins, not in action, but in attention. Where you place your attention determines your experience, and if your attention is constantly pulled by fear, doubt, hypotheticals, you will live in a state of tension, even if your external life is calm. Now here's where it gets even deeper. Your mind doesn't just create thoughts. It creates urgency. It makes everything feel like it needs to be solved right now. What if this goes wrong? What if I made the wrong decision? What if they misunderstood me? And suddenly you feel pressure, tension, restlessness, like you need to figure it out immediately. But most of the time, there is nothing to solve. It's just mental noise demanding attention. This is how overthinking steals your peace, not through big problems, but through constant small interruptions. A thought here, a doubt there, a scenario playing in the background, and before you know it, your entire day is filled with invisible stress, even when nothing is actually wrong. This is what people don't understand. Overthinking doesn't just affect your decisions. It affects your state, your mood, your energy, your presence. And over time, it becomes your normal. You start waking up already thinking, already worrying, already analyzing before your feet even touch the ground. And that's when your day is already being controlled, before it even begins. But listen carefully. If your mind can create this level of chaos, it can also create clarity, because the same system that generates fear can be trained to generate focus. The same mind that spirals can be grounded, but only if you stop believing everything it tells you. That's the shift. Not fighting your thoughts, but questioning them. Because once you question a thought, you weaken its grip. You break its authority. You create space between you and the illusion. And in that space, you choose. Here's a simple but powerful shift you can start applying immediately. The next time your mind presents a worst-case scenario, don't engage with it. Don't analyze it. Ask one question. Is this happening right now? Not in the future, not in your imagination, right now. Most of the time, the answer is no. And that single realization pulls you back into reality, because overthinking lives in the future. Clarity lives in the present. And the more you return to the present, the quieter your mind becomes. Now let's take it one level deeper, because your mind doesn't just create fear, it creates identity. The more you repeat certain thoughts, the more they feel like you. I'm an overthinker. I'm anxious. I'm not confident. And once you attach those labels, you stop questioning them. You accept them. You build your life around them. But those labels, they were created by repetition, not truth. And anything created by repetition can be changed by repetition. This is where your power comes in. You are not here to fight your mind. You are here to train it, just like you would train your body, just like you would build a skill, through consistency, through awareness, through practice. Because a trained mind doesn't panic. It observes. It doesn't react immediately. It pauses. It doesn't believe everything. It chooses. And that's where we're going next. Because in the next chapter, we're going to break the first major pattern, the habit that keeps overthinking alive, the one behavior you repeat every single day, without even realizing it. And once you see it, you'll understand exactly why your mind won't slow down, and more importantly, how to finally quiet it. Stay with me, because this is where things start to shift in a real way. Chapter 3, the habit that feeds the noise. There is a pattern running your life right now, and you don't even see it. It's quiet, automatic, repetitive, And it's the reason your mind never shuts off. Not because you think too much, but because you engage too much. Every single thought that appears, you follow it, you analyze it, you expand it, you give it attention, and attention is fuel. That's the habit. That's the invisible behavior keeping the noise alive. Because thoughts don't become powerful on their own. They become powerful when you feed them. Let me show you how this works. A single thought appears. What if I mess this up? On its own, it's small, weak, temporary. But instead of letting it pass, you grab it. You start analyzing. What would happen if I fail? What would people think? Have I failed before? What if this goes badly? Now that one thought has turned into 10, then 20, then a full mental simulation. And suddenly, your body reacts, your heart rate shifts, your mood changes, your confidence drops. All because you followed a thought that didn't deserve your attention. That's the mechanism, and you repeat it every day without realizing it, because no one ever taught you the difference between thinking and engaging with thoughts. And that difference changes everything. Here's the truth most people miss. You don't control what thoughts appear, but you absolutely control which ones you entertain. That's your power. And right now, you've been given that power away. Every time you chase a thought, you strengthen it. Every time you analyze it, you make it more real. Every time you react to it, you train your brain to repeat it. That's why the same thoughts keep coming back. Not because they're important, but because they've been rewarded. This is how your mind learns. Repetition plus attention equals pattern, and overthinking is just a pattern that's been reinforced over time. But here's the good news. Anything learned can be unlearned. Anything repeated can be interrupted. But first, you have to stop feeding it. Now imagine this. You're sitting by a river. Leaves are floating by. Each leaf represents a thought. Some are neutral. Some are negative. Some are random. Now most people jump into the river. They grab every leaf, examine it, analyze it, try to control it, and then wonder why they feel overwhelmed. But what if you stayed on the shore? What if you just watched the leaves pass without touching them? That's what mental control looks like. Not stopping the river, but choosing not to jump in. Because the moment you stop engaging, the thoughts lose momentum. They pass faster, they weaken, they disappear. This is not theory. This is practice. And it starts with one simple shift. You stop answering every thought, because right now, your mind asks a question, and you feel obligated to respond. What if this goes wrong? And you answer. What if they don't like me? And you answer. What if I'm not ready? And you answer. But here's the truth. Not every question deserves an answer. Some questions are traps, designed by your own mind to keep you stuck. And the more you answer them, the deeper you go. So here's your next level of awareness. When a thought appears, don't immediately respond. Pause. Let it sit. Let it exist without interaction. This is uncomfortable at first because your brain is used to engagement. It wants closure. It wants resolution. It wants control. But you're not giving it that. You're giving it something better, space. Because in that space, you break the cycle. Now let's make this practical. The next time your mind says, what if I fail? Instead of answering, you say, maybe, maybe not. And you move on. No analysis, no deep dive, no emotional reaction, just neutral acknowledgement. This does something powerful. It tells your brain, this thought is not important. And over time, Your brain stops bringing it up as often because it's not getting rewarded. This is how you retrain your mind, not through force, but through non-engagement. Now here's where most people go wrong. They think controlling the mind means fighting thoughts, pushing them away, suppressing them, trying to silence them. But that doesn't work because resistance creates more tension, and what you resist persists. Instead, you allow thoughts to exist without giving them power. You observe without reacting. You notice without attaching. That's control. That's discipline. And that's what most people never learn. Now let's take this deeper, because overthinking isn't just about fear. It's also about control. Your mind wants certainty. It wants guarantees. It wants to predict outcomes. But life doesn't work that way, and the more you try to control everything, the more your mind creates scenarios to solve. That's why you overthink, because your brain is trying to solve a problem that cannot be solved in advance. And until you accept that, the thinking won't stop. So here's a powerful shift. You stop trying to solve life before it happens. Let that sink in, because right now, you're trying to think your way into certainty, into safety, into control. But clarity doesn't come from thinking more, it comes from acting more. Because action grounds you in reality. Thinking traps you in possibility, and possibility is infinite. That's why your mind never runs out of scenarios. But reality is simple. It's happening now. And when you anchor yourself in the present, the noise fades. This is why people who take action overthink less, not because they're smarter, but because they spend less time in their head and more time in real experience. So as you move forward, remember this. Every time you engage with a thought, you're choosing to stay in your head. Every time you ignore it, you're choosing to return to your life. And that choice, repeated consistently, changes everything. Now we're building something here, step by step. First awareness, then questioning. Now non-engagement. But we're not done, because there's another layer, a deeper one, the emotional hook. Because some thoughts feel stronger than others. They pull you in faster. They trigger something deeper. And in the next chapter, we're going to break that down. Why certain thoughts feel impossible to ignore. Why emotions take over so quickly. And how to stop getting pulled into those loops. Because once you master that, your mind stops controlling you, and you start controlling your state. Stay with me, because this next shift is where real emotional control begins. Dear viewers, write which city you're from. It's interesting to see which corners of the world are watching our videos. Chapter 4. The Emotional Hook. There's a reason some thoughts pass by like clouds, and others hit you like a storm. It's not the thought itself. It's the emotion attached to it. Because your mind doesn't just think, it feels. And when a thought carries emotion, it becomes heavier, louder, more convincing, more urgent. That's the hook. That's what pulls you in. You don't get trapped by every thought. You get trapped by the ones that make you feel something. Fear, embarrassment, regret, insecurity. Those are the ones that stick. Those are the ones that replay. Those are the ones that spiral. And without realizing it, you start reacting to the emotion as if it's truth. Let's slow this down. A thought appears. They didn't respond to my message. On its own, it's neutral, just a fact. But then your mind adds meaning. They're ignoring me. They don't respect me. I said something wrong. Now emotion enters, tension, anxiety, doubt, and suddenly You're no longer observing the thought. You're inside it, feeling it, believing it, reacting to it. That's how quickly it happens. Thought to meaning, to emotion, to reaction. And most of the time, you skip the first two steps. You go straight to feeling. And once you feel it, it feels real. That's the trap. Because emotions don't prove truth. They amplify perception. Read that again. Emotions don't prove truth. They amplify perception. And if your perception is distorted, your emotions will be too. But here's where your power comes in. You can interrupt that chain, not by stopping the thought, but by identifying the emotion. Because when you name an emotion, you separate yourself from it. Instead of saying, I'm anxious, you say, this is anxiety. Instead of, I'm overwhelmed, you say, this is overwhelm. Small shift, massive impact. Because now, you are not the emotion. You are observing it, and that creates distance, and distance creates control. This is one of the most powerful mental skills you can build. Labeling, not reacting, not suppressing. Labeling, because what you label, you weaken, and what you leave unnamed controls you. That's why so many people feel overwhelmed, not because their emotions are too strong, but because they've never learned how to see them clearly. Everything blends together, thoughts, feelings, reactions, one continuous storm. But once you start separating them, everything slows down. You begin to see the pattern, and once you see it, you can change it. Now let's go deeper. Your brain is wired to prioritize emotional experiences. That's why you remember painful moments more than neutral ones. That's why negative thoughts feel louder than positive ones. It's called negativity bias. And it's not your fault. It's survival programming. But in today's world, it becomes a problem because your brain treats emotional discomfort like danger. So it tries to fix it immediately. That's why when you feel anxious, your mind starts searching for answers. What's wrong? What caused this? How do I fix it? And suddenly, you're back in a loop. Thinking more, analyzing more, trying to escape the feeling. But here's the truth most people avoid. You don't need to fix every emotion. You need to feel it without reacting to it. Because emotions are temporary. They rise, they peak, they fall. But when you resist them, you prolong them. When you fight them, you strengthen them. And when you try to think your way out of them, you trap yourself deeper. So here's the shift. Instead of asking, how do I stop this feeling? You ask, can I allow this feeling without reacting to it? That changes everything because now you're not trying to escape. You're building tolerance, and tolerance is what creates emotional strength. Think about it like this. If every time discomfort appears, you try to eliminate it. You train your mind to fear it. But if you sit with it, observe it, let it pass. You train your mind that it's not dangerous. And over time, it loses its intensity. This is how you break emotional loops, not by control, but by acceptance. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but what if the feeling is too strong? Good. That's where the real work begins. Because strength is not built in comfort. It's built in those exact moments when your mind is loud, when your chest feels tight, when your thoughts are racing. That's your training ground. Not later, not when things are calm, right there. Because every time you stay present in discomfort without reacting, you are rewiring your brain. You are teaching it, I can handle this. I don't need to escape. I don't need to overthink. And slowly, the intensity fades Now, let's connect this back to overthinking. Overthinking is often an attempt to escape emotion. You don't like uncertainty, so you think more. You don't like discomfort, so you analyze more. You don't like not knowing, so you create scenarios. But all of that is avoidance, and avoidance keeps the cycle alive. So the next time you catch yourself overthinking, pause. Ask yourself, what am I trying to avoid feeling right now? That question alone will change how you see your thoughts. Because underneath every spiral, there is an emotion. And once you face that emotion, the thinking loses its purpose. This is the deeper layer of control, not just managing thoughts, but understanding why they exist. Because once you understand the root, you stop chasing the surface. And that's where real freedom begins. Now, we're building momentum. You've learned awareness. You've learned non-engagement. You've learned emotional labeling. But we're about to take this even further because there's one environment where overthinking becomes strongest, where your mind gets the loudest, where control feels the weakest. And that's when you're alone, with no distractions, no noise, just you and your thoughts. And in the next chapter, we're going to step into that space. We're going to break down why silence feels uncomfortable, why your mind gets louder when everything gets quiet, and how to finally feel at peace in your own presence. Because if you can master that, you don't just control your mind, you transform your relationship with yourself. Stay with me, because this next shift is where everything becomes personal. Chapter 5, When Silence Gets Loud. There's a moment most people try to avoid. No phone, no music, no conversation, no distractions, just you and your mind. And suddenly, it gets loud. Not externally, internally. Thoughts start rising, old memories, unfinished conversations, future worries, questions you've been avoiding, feelings you've been suppressing. Everything you've pushed aside begins to surface. And that's when most people reach for something, a screen, a message, a distraction, anything to fill the silence, because silence feels uncomfortable. But here's the truth you need to understand. Silence is not the problem. What shows up in silence is, and what shows up is what you've been running from. This is why overthinking feels strongest when you're alone, because there's nothing left to distract you, no external noise to drown out the internal one. And for most people, that's terrifying, not because their thoughts are dangerous, but because they've never learned how to sit with them. So instead, they escape, they scroll, they consume, they fill every empty moment. And over time, they lose the ability to be alone with themselves. That's where disconnection begins. Because if you can't sit with your own mind, you'll never understand it. And if you never understand it, you'll never control it. So let's shift this perspective. Silence is not something to avoid. It's something to train in, because silence reveals your patterns. It shows you what your mind defaults to. It exposes the thoughts that repeat, the fears that linger, the narratives that keep playing. And once you see them clearly, you can start to change them. But only if you stay. Only if you don't run. This is where most people fail. They want control, but they avoid the environment that builds it. Imagine trying to get physically stronger, but avoiding resistance, avoiding effort, avoiding discomfort. It wouldn't work. And the same applies here. Mental strength is built in silence, in stillness, in those moments where nothing is happening externally, but everything is happening internally. So here's what you're going to start doing. You're going to create space intentionally, not by accident, not when you're forced to, but by choice. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, no distractions, no input, just sitting, observing, listening, not to react, not to fix, just to notice. This might feel uncomfortable at first. Your mind will try to pull you in, thought after thought, scenario after scenario. But remember what you've learned. You don't engage. You observe. You let the thoughts pass, like leaves on water. And something interesting begins to happen. The more you sit, the less intense it becomes. The noise starts to slow down. The thoughts lose their urgency because they're not being fed. They're not being followed. They're just passing. And in between those thoughts, you start to notice something else. Space, stillness, calm. It's subtle at first, easy to miss, but it's there. And that's what you're building, not a silent mind, but a spacious one, a mind where thoughts can exist without overwhelming you, a mind where you can choose instead of react. Now let's go deeper, because silence doesn't just reveal thoughts, it reveals identity, the way you talk to yourself, the way you see yourself, the beliefs you carry. And this is where things get real, because most people don't have a supportive inner voice. They have a critical one, a doubtful one, a harsh one, constantly questioning, constantly judging, constantly pointing out what's wrong. And when you sit in silence, that voice becomes clear. And at first, you might not like what you hear, but that's okay. Because awareness is not about comfort, it's about truth. And once you hear that voice, you can start to challenge it, not by fighting it, but by questioning it. When it says, you're not good enough, you don't accept it. You ask, is that true? When it says, you're going to fail, you don't react. You observe, that's fear speaking. And slowly, that voice loses its authority because you're no longer blindly believing it. This is how you rebuild your relationship with yourself, not through positive thinking, but through honest observation, because you can't change what you don't see. And silence shows you everything. Now, here's something important. This is not about becoming someone who loves silence instantly. It's about becoming someone who is not controlled by discomfort, because silence will always bring something up. That's its nature. But your response, that's what changes. You go from avoidance to acceptance, from reaction to observation, from chaos to clarity. And over time, you start to crave it, not because it's easy, but because it's real. Because in a world full of noise, silence becomes your reset, your grounding, your control point. And once you have that, everything else becomes easier. Decisions, emotions, focus, presence, because you're no longer dependent on external conditions to feel internal stability. Now we're stepping into deeper territory, because once you can sit with your thoughts and observe your emotions, there's one more layer, the one that shapes your actions, your habits, your behavior, and that's your impulses, those immediate urges, the need to check your phone, the need to respond, the need to react, the need to escape. Because overthinking doesn't just live in thoughts, it shows up in actions. And in the next chapter, we're going to break that down, how your impulses are connected to your thinking, why you feel the need to act immediately, and how to finally create control between urge and action. Because once you master that, you don't just silence your mind. You take control of your life. Stay with me, because this next step is where discipline truly begins. Chapter 6. The space between urge and action. There's a moment in your life that decides everything. It's small, almost invisible, but it's there. Every single day. The moment between what you feel and what you do. An urge appears, a thought rises, a feeling builds, and then you act. Automatically, without thinking, without questioning, without choosing. That gap, that tiny space, is where your power lives, and right now, you're skipping it. Because overthinking doesn't just trap you in your mind. It leaks into your actions. You feel uncomfortable. So you reach for your phone. You feel uncertain. So you delay. You feel anxious. So you avoid. You feel doubt. So you stay quiet. Every action is being driven by an internal state you haven't learned to control. That's the connection most people miss. They think overthinking is just mental, but it's behavioral. It shapes how you move, how you respond, how you live. And if your actions are reactive, your life becomes reactive. That's why you feel stuck. Not because you don't know what to do, but because your impulses keep overriding your intentions. You say you want to focus, but you scroll. You say you want to act, but you hesitate. You say you want to move forward, but you wait. That's not a lack of discipline. That's a lack of awareness between urge and action. Because in that moment, you're not choosing, you're reacting. And reaction is the opposite of control. So here's the shift. You're going to slow that moment down, not by force, but by awareness. Because once you see the urge, you create space. And once you create space, you can choose. Let's break it down. An impulse appears. Check your phone. Instead of instantly reacting, you pause. You notice it. You label it. That's an urge. That's it. No judgment, no resistance, just awareness. And something interesting happens. The urgency weakens. Because most impulses rely on speed. They want you to act before you think. But when you slow down, you break their momentum. Now you have a choice, not forced, not pressured, but intentional. And that's where discipline begins. Not in big decisions, but in small moments. Repeated daily. Because every time you pause, you strengthen control. Every time you react automatically, you reinforce the habit. That's how patterns are built. And that's how they're broken. Now here's something you need to understand. Impulses are not the enemy. They're signals. Just like emotions. Just like thoughts. They're your brain trying to move you. But not all movement is progress. And not all urges deserve action. So instead of fighting your impulses, you observe them. You question them. You decide. Because control is not about suppression, it's about selection. Choosing what aligns with your direction. And ignoring what doesn't. Now let's connect this back to overthinking. Why do you think you check your phone so often? Why do you think you avoid silence? Why do you think you distract yourself? Because stillness feels uncomfortable, and your brain is trying to escape that discomfort, so it creates an impulse, a quick action, a distraction, something to shift your state. But every time you obey that impulse, you reinforce the cycle. Discomfort to escape to temporary relief to repeat. And over time, your tolerance for stillness decreases. Your need for stimulation increases. And your mind becomes more restless. That's why it's hard to focus. That's why it's hard to sit still. That's why your thoughts feel louder. Because you've trained your brain to avoid silence. But now, you're reversing that. You're building tolerance. Not by force, but by staying. When the urge to check your phone appears, you wait 5 seconds, 10 seconds. You don't act immediately. You let the urge exist without obeying it. And something powerful happens. You realize you don't have to act on everything you feel. That's freedom. That's control. Because most people live their entire lives reacting to impulses, never questioning them, never challenging them, just moving from one urge to the next and calling it normal. But you're stepping out of that. You're creating space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you're building a different kind of mind, a trained mind, a disciplined mind, a mind that doesn't panic, doesn't rush, doesn't react automatically. Now let's take this deeper, because the strongest impulses are not the obvious ones. They're subtle. The urge to explain yourself, the urge to overanalyze, the urge to replay a conversation, the urge to seek reassurance, the urge to predict outcomes. These are mental impulses, and they feed overthinking, because every time you follow them, you go deeper into the loop. But now you see them, you notice them, and once you notice them, you can stop, not by force, but by choice. You pause, you breathe, you return to the present, because the present is where control lives, not in the past, not in the future, right here, right now. And the more you practice this, the stronger it becomes. It won't be perfect. You'll slip, you'll react, you'll catch yourself late. That's part of the process. But every time you notice, every time you pause, every time you choose differently, you're rewiring your mind. You're building a new default, and over time, that becomes who you are. Not someone who reacts, but someone who responds. Not someone who escapes, but someone who stays. Not someone controlled by impulses, but someone who controls them. Now we've covered something powerful here. Awareness, non-engagement, emotional control, silence, impulse control. You're building layers, and each layer strengthens the next. But there's still one major piece missing, because even if you learn to control your thoughts, even if you master your emotions, even if you pause before acting, there's one thing that can still pull you back: your environment, the people, the inputs, the constant noise from the outside world. Because your mind doesn't exist in isolation. It's shaped by what you consume, what you watch, what you listen to, who you surround yourself with. And in the next chapter, we're going to break that down. How your environment feeds your overthinking, how external noise becomes internal chaos, and how to finally protect your mind from the things that keep pulling you back. Stay with me, because this next shift will change not just how you think, but what you allow into your life. Dear viewer, we would really be grateful if you could share your ideas on how we can improve our videos in the comments. Thank you very much. Chapter 7. The Environment That Controls Your Mind. You think your thoughts are yours, but most of them aren't. They've been shaped, influenced, repeated, programmed by what you allow into your environment. Every video you watch, every conversation you engage in, every notification you check, every opinion you absorb. It all leaves a trace, and over time, those traces become your thinking patterns. That's the part most people ignore. They try to fix their mind without changing what feeds it. And that's like trying to stay calm while constantly pouring noise into your system. It doesn't work, because your mind reflects what it consumes. So if your inputs are chaotic, your thoughts will be chaotic. If your inputs are negative, your thoughts will lean negative. If your inputs are overwhelming, Your mind will feel overwhelmed. This is not weakness. This is conditioning. And right now, most people are overconditioned. Too much information, too many opinions, too many voices, all competing for attention, and your brain, it's trying to process all of it. That's why you feel mentally exhausted. Not because you're doing too much, but because you're consuming too much. Think about your average day. You wake up, and before your mind even has a chance to settle, you check your phone, messages, social media, news, updates. You immediately step into someone else's world, someone else's thoughts, someone else's energy. And from that moment on, your mind is no longer clear. It's reactive. Because you didn't start your day with intention. You started it with input, and input shapes direction. That's why your thoughts feel scattered, because they're not all yours. They're a mix, a blend, a constant stream of external noise that you've internalized. So here's the shift. You don't just train your mind, you protect it. Because control is not only about what you do internally, it's about what you allow externally. Now let's make this real. If you spend hours consuming content that creates comparison, you will overthink your progress. If you constantly read negative news, you will overthink your safety. If you surround yourself with people who complain, you will overthink problems. It's inevitable because your brain absorbs patterns. It mirrors what it sees, it repeats what it hears. So if you want a calmer mind, you need a cleaner environment. Not perfect, not isolated, but intentional. This is where discipline takes a new form, not just in action, but in selection. What you watch, what you listen to, who you engage with, what you give your attention to. Because attention is currency, and you've been spending it everywhere without realizing the cost. Now here's something most people resist. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to stay updated on everything. You don't need to consume constantly, because more information does not equal more clarity. In fact, it often creates more confusion, because every new piece of information adds another perspective, another possibility, another layer to think about. And before you know it, you're overwhelmed, not because you lack answers, but because you have too many. That's the paradox of the modern world. Unlimited access, limited clarity. So the solution is not more input. It's less, more intentional, more selective, more aligned. Because when you reduce the noise, your natural clarity returns. It was never gone. It was just buried. Now let's talk about people. Because your environment is not just digital, it's social. The conversations you have, the energy you're around, the mindset of the people in your circle. All of it affects your thinking. If you're constantly around people who doubt, you'll start doubting. If you're around people who complain, you'll start focusing on problems. If you're around people who overthink, you'll normalize overthinking, not because you choose to, but because it becomes familiar. And familiarity feels comfortable, even when it's limiting. So here's a question you need to ask yourself honestly. Who is shaping your thinking? Not influencing, shaping. Because influence is temporary, but repeated exposure creates patterns. And those patterns become your default. Now, this doesn't mean you cut everyone off. It means you become aware. You choose where to spend your time. You choose what conversations you engage in. You choose what energy you allow into your space. Because protecting your mind is not selfish, it's necessary, especially in a world that constantly demands your attention. Now let's bring this back to overthinking. Overthinking thrives in noise, in constant input, in endless comparison, in uncertainty created by too many options. But when you simplify your environment, something powerful happens. Your mind slows down, not because you forced it, but because there's less to process, less to analyze, less to react to. And in that simplicity, you find clarity. You make decisions faster. You feel more grounded. You become more present. Because you're no longer pulled in 10 different directions. Now here's a practical shift you can start immediately. Create one space in your day where there is no input, no phone, no content, no external noise, just you. Even if it's 10 minutes, that space becomes your reset, your baseline, your control point. And the more you protect that space, the stronger your mind becomes. Because you're not constantly reacting, you're choosing. And that's what separates control from chaos. Now we're stepping into a new level because you started to take control internally. You started to protect your environment externally. But there's still one more layer, the one that ties everything together, your identity. Because how you see yourself determines how you think, how you act, how you respond. And if your identity is built around overthinking, you will keep returning to it, even when you try to change. So, in the next chapter, we're going to break that. We're going to redefine how you see yourself, how you talk to yourself, and how to shift from someone who overthinks to someone who is calm, clear, and in control. Because once your identity changes, everything else follows. Stay with me, because this next shift is where transformation becomes permanent. Chapter 8, the identity shift. Up to this point, you've been learning how to observe your thoughts, how to create space, how to stop reacting, how to control your environment. But now we step into something deeper, because none of that will stick if you still see yourself the same way. If deep down you still believe, I'm an overthinker, I'm just anxious, this is how I've always been, then every time you make progress, you'll pull yourself back, not consciously, automatically, because identity is the strongest force in your life, stronger than motivation, stronger than discipline, stronger than logic. You will always act in alignment with who you believe you are. So if your identity says, I'm someone who overthinks everything, your mind will keep producing that pattern, even when you try to change, even when you know better, because your brain seeks consistency, not improvement. And consistency with your identity feels safe, even if it's limiting. That's why change feels hard. Not because you're incapable, but because you're trying to act differently while believing the same things about yourself. That's the conflict. And until you resolve it, you'll keep going in circles. So here's the shift. You don't just change your thoughts, you change the way you define yourself. Not through affirmations, not through pretending, but through evidence. Because identity is built through repetition, through what you do, not what you say. So instead of saying, I'm trying to stop overthinking, you start saying, I'm someone who is learning to control my mind. Feel the difference. One keeps you stuck in the problem. The other moves you toward the solution. Because identity is not fixed. It's flexible. It evolves based on your actions. Every time you pause instead of reacting, you reinforce a new identity. Every time you observe instead of spiraling, you build a new pattern. Every time you choose clarity over chaos, You become someone different, not overnight, but over time. This is how transformation happens, quietly, consistently, without needing to force it. Now let's go deeper, because identity is not just what you say about yourself, it's what you expect from yourself. If you expect to overthink, you will. If you expect to get anxious, you will. If you expect to lose control, you will. Because your expectations shape your behavior, and your behavior reinforces your identity. So we're going to shift that. You're going to start expecting control, not perfection, not silence. Control. You expect yourself to pause. You expect yourself to notice. You expect yourself to choose. And when you slip, you don't say, "See, I knew I couldn't change." You say, "That's part of the process." Because your identity is no longer based on outcomes. It's based on effort, on awareness, on consistency. That's what makes it strong. Now here's something powerful. Most people build their identity based on the past. What I've done, what I've felt, what I've struggled with. But the past is not a fixed definition. It's just a collection of patterns, and patterns can be changed. So instead of asking, "Who have I been?" you start asking, "Who am I becoming?" That question alone shifts your focus forward, because now you're not trapped in history. You're building direction, and direction is what creates momentum. Now let's make this practical. From this moment forward, you stop labeling yourself as someone who overthinks. You stop reinforcing that identity. Instead, you start noticing moments of control, small ones, simple ones. You paused before reacting. You let a thought pass. You didn't check your phone immediately. You sat in silence for a minute. Those moments matter because they are proof. Proof that you are changing. Proof that you are capable. Proof that you are not your past patterns. And the more you collect that evidence, the stronger your new identity becomes. Now here's where it gets interesting. When your identity shifts, your decisions become easier because you don't have to think about what to do. You act in alignment with who you are. Someone who is calm doesn't chase every thought. Someone who is disciplined doesn't react to every impulse. Someone who is in control doesn't get pulled into every emotion. It becomes natural, not forced. And that's the goal. Not to fight your mind forever, but to become someone who no longer needs to, because control becomes your default. Now let's address something important. This is not about becoming emotionless. It's not about shutting down. It's not about being perfect. It's about being aware, grounded, intentional, because real control is not about eliminating thoughts. It's about not being controlled by them. And that's a completely different standard. Now, as you move forward, you're going to notice something. Your mind will try to pull you back. Old thoughts, old habits, old patterns, because that's what it knows. That's what feels familiar. But now, you see it. And once you see it, it loses its power, because awareness breaks repetition, and repetition is what created the pattern in the first place. So every time you choose differently, you weaken the old identity and strengthen the new one. This is not instant. This is not easy. But it is simple, and if you stay consistent, it becomes permanent. Now, we've reached a turning point, because you've built awareness, you've created space, you've learned to sit with discomfort, you've started controlling your impulses, you've cleaned your environment, and now you're reshaping your identity. But there's still one challenge left, one that tests everything you've learned. Real life, pressure, uncertainty, situations where your mind wants to take over again, because it's easy to stay calm when everything is controlled. But what about when it's not? What about when things go wrong, when you're judged, when you fail, when you don't know what's next? That's where real mastery is tested. And in the next chapter, we're going to step into that. How to stay calm under pressure, how to think clearly when emotions rise, and how to hold control even when everything around you feels uncertain, because that's where this becomes real. Stay with me, because this next level is where your training gets tested. Chapter 9, Calm in Chaos. It's easy to feel in control when nothing is testing you, when the room is quiet, when the stakes are low, when everything is predictable. But life doesn't stay like that. Pressure comes, unexpected situations, tense conversations, moments where everything feels uncertain, and suddenly your mind gets loud again, fast, intense, demanding control. That's where most people lose everything they've built, not because they didn't learn the tools, but because they never practiced them under pressure. So this chapter is where theory becomes reality, because real control is not proven in calm moments. It's proven in chaotic ones. Let's step into that moment. You're in a situation you didn't expect. Something goes wrong. Someone says something that triggers you. You feel tension rise in your body. Your heart rate shifts. Your thoughts speed up. And instantly, your mind starts trying to take over. What do I say? What do they think? This is bad. I need to fix this. That's the moment. That's the test. Because in that exact second, you have two options: react or respond. And the difference between those two defines everything. Reaction is automatic, fast, emotional, uncontrolled. It comes from habit, from pattern, from conditioning. Response is intentional, measured, aware. It comes from presence, from training, from choice. And the only thing that separates them is space. That same space you've been building between thought and action, between emotion and behavior. So when pressure hits, you don't speed up, you slow down. That's the first rule, because your mind will try to rush you. It will create urgency. It will tell you that you need to act immediately. But most of the time, that's not true. It's just your brain trying to regain control. So instead, you pause, even if it's just for a second, even if it's just a breath. That pause is power. Because in that pause, you break the automatic reaction, and once you break that, you regain control. Now let's go deeper. When pressure rises, your body responds before your mind. Tension, tightness, heat. Your nervous system activates, and your brain interprets that as danger. That's why your thoughts get louder, because your system is trying to protect you. But here's the shift. You don't fight the feeling. You acknowledge it. This is pressure. This is stress. This is my body reacting. That's it. You name it. You don't judge it. You don't try to eliminate it. You let it exist without letting it control you, because the moment you try to fight it, you amplify it. But when you allow it, it stabilizes. Now, here's where most people go wrong. They think they need to feel calm before they act calm. But that's backwards. You act calm, and your body follows. You slow your breathing, you relax your posture, you ground yourself in the present, and your system begins to settle, because your body and mind are connected. Change one, and the other adjusts. This is how you stay composed, not by waiting for calm, but by creating it. Now let's talk about thinking under pressure, because this is where overthinking usually explodes. Your mind tries to predict outcomes, control the situation, avoid mistakes, and in doing so, it overwhelms itself. So instead of trying to think everything through, you simplify. You focus on the next step, not the entire outcome, not every possibility, just the next move. Because clarity doesn't come from complexity, it comes from focus. What do I need to do right now? That's the question, not what if this goes wrong, not what does this mean long term, right now. Because when you anchor yourself in the present, your thinking becomes clear, your actions become simple, and your mind stops spiraling. Now here's something powerful. Pressure doesn't create weakness. It reveals patterns. It shows you where your mind goes under stress, where you default, where you react. And that's valuable because every time you face pressure, you get feedback. You see what still needs work, what still triggers you, what still pulls you into old habits. And instead of seeing that as failure, you see it as training, because every moment of awareness is progress. Even if you reacted, even if you slipped, even if you caught yourself late, it still counts. Because now you see it, and once you see it, you can change it. Now imagine this. You're in a situation that used to overwhelm you, and instead of reacting, you pause, you breathe, you observe, you choose your response. Calm, clear, controlled. That moment changes how you see yourself, because now you have proof that you're not controlled by your mind, proof that you can handle pressure, proof that you've changed, and that builds confidence, real confidence, not from success, but from control. Because confidence is not about knowing everything will go right. It's about knowing you can handle it if it doesn't. That's the difference. And that's what you're building. Now here's the truth. You won't get this perfect. There will be moments where your mind takes over, where you react, where you lose control. That's part of the process. But the goal is not perfection. It's awareness. Because the faster you catch yourself, the faster you return to control. And over time, that gap shrinks. You catch it earlier, you recover faster, you stay grounded longer, and eventually, calm becomes your default. Even under pressure, now we've reached a powerful point. You've learned how to handle your mind in silence, in everyday moments, and now under pressure. But there's still one final internal challenge, one that keeps people stuck, even when they know all of this. Fear of action, because overthinking often shows up right before you act, before decisions, before risks, before stepping into the unknown. And in the next chapter, we're going to break that. How to stop thinking yourself out of action, how to move forward with clarity, and how to finally trust yourself enough to take the next step. Because control is not just about calming your mind, it's about moving your life forward. Stay with me, because this next shift is where everything turns into action. If you like this audiobook, please give it a like. It will really help us promote the video. Chapter 10, The Moment Before. Action. There is a moment right before you do something important, where everything inside you starts to resist. You've felt it. Before sending the message, before making the decision, before taking the risk, before stepping forward, your mind suddenly gets louder, faster, more convincing. What if this is wrong? What if I regret it? What if this doesn't work? What if I fail? And just like that, you stop, you hesitate, you delay. not because you can't act, but because you've thought yourself out of action. This is where overthinking becomes dangerous, not when you're sitting still, but when you're about to move. Because action is what changes your life, and overthinking is what keeps you in place. So this chapter is about one thing: breaking hesitation, understanding it, interrupting it, and moving forward anyway. Let's start with the truth. Your mind will always try to stop you before uncertainty. Always. Because uncertainty means risk. And risk means potential failure. And your brain is wired to avoid that. So when you're about to act, it activates. It creates scenarios. It raises doubts. It slows you down. Not because it's right, but because it's protective. And if you don't recognize that, you'll mistake fear for logic. You'll think you're being careful when you're actually avoiding growth. That's the trap. Because hesitation feels reasonable. It feels smart. It feels responsible. But most of the time, it's just fear wearing a mask. Now, here's the shift. You stop waiting for certainty. Because certainty does not come before action. It comes after. Clarity is not something you think your way into. It's something you move your way into. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes. Because your mind keeps adding more layers, more doubt, more scenarios, more reasons not to act. Until the action feels impossible. That's why speed matters. Not reckless speed, but intentional speed. You shorten the gap between decision and action, because the longer you sit in that gap, the more your mind interferes. So here's a powerful rule. Decide and move. Not perfectly, not with full certainty, but with direction. Because progress doesn't come from perfect decisions. It comes from committed ones. Now let's go deeper. Why do you really hesitate? It's not just fear of failure. It's fear of identity damage. What if I try and it proves I'm not good enough? What if I act and it exposes me? What if this doesn't work and I have to face that? That's the real fear. Not the outcome, but what it means about you. And that's why you overthink. Because thinking keeps you safe. Thinking keeps you in possibility. Thinking protects your identity by avoiding reality. But here's the truth you need to accept. You don't grow by protecting your identity. You grow by challenging it. Every time you act, you risk being wrong, you risk discomfort, you risk failure, but you also gain something far more valuable: experience, clarity, strength, because action gives you feedback, and feedback is what moves you forward. Thinking alone does not. Now let's make this practical. The next time you feel hesitation, you don't argue with your mind. You don't try to eliminate the fear. You acknowledge it. This is hesitation. This is fear. And then you move anyway, not because you feel ready, but because you've decided. That's discipline. Not acting when it's easy, but acting when it's uncomfortable. Now here's something powerful. Action reduces overthinking immediately. Because once you act, there's less to analyze, less to imagine, less to fear. Reality replaces possibility, and reality is always simpler than your mind makes it. Think about it. How many things have you overthought that turned out to be easier than you expected? How many situations felt bigger in your head than they were in real life? That's the illusion. And the only way to break it is to step into reality. Now let's talk about mistakes, because this is where most people freeze. They want to avoid being wrong. They want to avoid failure. They want to get it right the first time. But that mindset creates paralysis, Because if every decision has to be perfect, you'll never move. So instead, you shift your standard. You don't aim to be right, you aim to learn. Because learning removes pressure. Learning makes action easier. Learning makes mistakes valuable. And when mistakes become part of the process, you stop fearing them. You start using them. That's how confident people think. Not, what if I fail? But what will this teach me? That shift alone frees you. Now let's connect this back to control. Because control is not just about calming your mind. It's about directing your life. And you cannot direct your life if you're stuck in hesitation, if you're constantly thinking but rarely acting. Because thinking without action is just delay. And delay is what keeps you in the same place. So here's your new standard. You don't wait for the perfect moment. You create movement. You don't wait for clarity. You build it through action. You don't wait for confidence. You earn it through experience. And every time you do that, you weaken overthinking. Because overthinking cannot survive in action. It only exists in delay. Now imagine this. You're about to do something that normally triggers you. And instead of overthinking, you move, you act, you follow through, and afterwards, you realize something. You were capable the entire time. That moment changes everything, because now you have proof. Proof that your mind was exaggerating. Proof that fear was misleading you. Proof that action is the way forward. And once you see that, you stop trusting your hesitation. You start trusting yourself. Now we've reached a critical point, because you've learned how to calm your mind, how to control your emotions, how to manage your impulses, how to protect your environment, how to shift your identity, and now, how to act despite hesitation. But there's still one final internal barrier, one that sits underneath all of this. The need for control, the need to know, the need to predict. Because as long as you need certainty, your mind will keep creating noise. So in the next chapter, we're going to let go. We're going to break the illusion of control and show you how to find peace, even when you don't know what's coming next. Because that is the final layer of mental freedom. Stay with me, because this next shift will change how you relate to life itself. Chapter 11, Letting Go of Control. There's a silent addiction most people never admit. The need to know, the need to predict, the need to control what hasn't happened yet. And it feels responsible. It feels smart. It feels like preparation. But in reality, it's one of the biggest sources of overthinking in your life. Because the more you try to control the future, the more your mind creates scenarios to manage. What if this goes wrong? What if I chose wrong? What if something unexpected happens? And suddenly, you're back in the loop, thinking, analyzing, trying to solve problems that don't exist yet. That's the illusion, because control over the future is not real. It's imagined. And the tighter you try to hold it, the more anxious you become. Think about it. How much of your stress comes from things happening right now, and how much comes from things that might happen? Most of it is the second, because your mind lives in possibility, but your peace lives in reality. And reality is always happening now. So here's the shift that changes everything. You stop trying to control what you cannot control, not as an idea, not as a quote, but as a daily practice. Because control has limits. You can control your actions, your responses, your focus, but you cannot control outcomes, other people, timing, uncertainty. And when you try to, you create tension because you're fighting something that doesn't respond to force. Now, this doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop planning. It means you stop over-attaching to outcomes. You do what you can, and you release the rest. That's real control, not controlling everything, but controlling your relationship with what happens. Now let's go deeper. Your mind overthinks because it believes, if I think enough, I'll prevent problems. But that's not true. Thinking does not prevent uncertainty. It only amplifies it. Because for every scenario you solve, your mind creates another one and another and another. There is no end. That's why overthinking feels endless. Because it is, unless you interrupt it. And the way you interrupt it is by letting go, not giving up, not avoiding. Letting go of the need to know everything in advance, because clarity is not found in prediction, it's found in presence. Now here's something important. Letting go does not feel comfortable at first. It feels like losing control. It feels like stepping into the unknown. It feels like risk. But that discomfort is temporary because on the other side of it is peace. The kind of peace that doesn't depend on outcomes. The kind of peace that stays even when things are uncertain. That's what you're building. Not a perfect life, but a stable mind. Now let's make this practical. The next time your mind starts asking, what if this goes wrong? Instead of answering, you respond with something simple. I'll handle it if it happens. That's it. You don't need to solve it now. You don't need to predict every outcome. You trust yourself. You trust your ability to respond. And that trust reduces the need to overthink. Because overthinking often comes from a lack of self-trust. If I don't figure this out now, I won't be able to handle it later. But that's not true. You've handled things before. You've adapted. You've figured it out. And you will again. So instead of trying to control the future, you strengthen your ability to face it. That's the shift. From control to confidence, from prediction to presence. Now let's talk about uncertainty, because this is where most people struggle. They want guarantees, clear answers, defined paths. But life doesn't work like that. There will always be unknowns, always variables you can't control, always outcomes you can't predict. And if you resist that, you create constant tension. But if you accept it, you create freedom. Because now, you're not fighting reality. You're working with it. You move forward without needing everything to be clear. You act without needing certainty. You live without needing control over every detail. And that is powerful. Now imagine this. You're facing a situation where you don't know what will happen. Now here's the final shift. You stop looking for external solutions to internal problems. You stop thinking, I need a better situation to feel better. I need more clarity before I act. I need things to change first. No, you become the change internally, and everything else follows. Because when your mind is clear, your decisions improve, your actions improve, your life improves from the inside out. Now let's bring this to a close, not as an ending, but as a beginning. Because what you've built here is not temporary, it's foundational, a way of thinking, a way of being, a way of living, and from this point forward, you carry it into your days, into your decisions, into your challenges. Because the real test is not what you do while listening, it's what you do after, when no one is guiding you, when no one is reminding you, when it's just you and your mind. That's where this becomes real. Now, before we finish, I want you to make something clear to yourself. Not a vague intention, not a general idea, a decision, a commitment, something simple, something real. Say it in your mind, or out loud if you can. I take control of my mind, not tomorrow, not later, now, because control is not given, it's taken, in small moments, repeated daily. Now here's your final reminder. You will not always feel in control, but you always have access to it. Through awareness, through pause, through choice, that's your foundation, and if you return to it again and again, you will not go back. Now, if this journey resonated with you, don't let it stay passive. Turn it into something real. If even one moment made you reflect, hit like, not for the video, but as a contract with yourself. A reminder that you're serious about change. And in the comments, write one thing you're taking control of starting today. One habit, one pattern, one shift. Because clarity grows when you declare it. And if you want to stay consistent, subscribe. Not as a button, but as accountability, as a decision to keep showing up for yourself. And if you know someone who's stuck in their own head, share this with them. Because sometimes one shift in perspective changes everything. Now, as we close this, remember this one line. Carry it with you. A quiet mind is not found. It is built. And you've just begun building yours.